Welcome back to the Arctic tundra that is my room. Yes, this is a heated blanket, and what you're hearing is a mini space heater. Deal with it. On the good news, though, I did find the remote to my background lights, so there's no more rave going on. In any case, let's talk about Windows of Opportunity and Ultimate Weapon. These are two perks that seem to constantly be going at each other, or at least that the opposite sides of these perks continuously bitch about. Now, I have a video planned in the future where I basically cover every single info perk in the game, but that's not going to be ready for another week because, well, it's a long video. But I figured that I wanted to go ahead and cover these two now because last Sunday I uploaded a video called Powerful Does Not Equal Unbalanced. And in it, I went over both Ultimate Weapon and Windows of Opportunity, although very briefly. And the comments were full of people telling me that these two perks are actually some of the most powerful things in the world and they're completely broken and they just play the game for the killers, they play the game for the survivor, and you no. The first thing that I genuinely want to talk about is what info perks are for. I was saving this joke for the info perk video, but I'll do it now because I'll do it again because no one can fucking stop me. But info perks only give you knowledge, and knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe! I was going to actually implement the clip, but YouTube, copyright. I need to pay my car payment. So the point is that knowledge is a powerful tool, but just because you have knowledge, it doesn't necessarily mean you know how to use it. So one of the big things that I talked about was, of course, Windows of Opportunity, and all of the perks are all of the comments saying that Windows of Opportunity is something that needed to be nerfed or needed to be taken out of the game or needed to be gutted or what the fuck ever they were trying to say in those comments was a bunch of people saying that Windows of Opportunity plays the game for you. No, it doesn't. Just like every other info perk in the game, Windows of Opportunity lets you know where things are, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to effectively use the items that you know the location of. In this case, it tells you where every pallet and vault is within a certain meter radius, and if you put on open-handed, I think you can see like most of the map. The argument here is that then all people need to do is just look for the next window or look for the next pallet, and then they will be able to just chain those together and effectively outrun the killer in any given circumstance. But either the people who are commenting this are very low-skilled killers, no offense, or they're just not thinking properly. Just because you chain loops together, it doesn't make those loops powerful. Don't get me wrong, I've talked actively in the past about how much I hate filler pallets and how they always seem to spawn very close together because it makes catching survivors a bit more of a pain in the ass when you get pallet stunned at one little filler pallet and then immediately upon approaching the next filler loop get pallet stunned again. But that's mostly because I'm a bad killer main myself, but objectively, I know that that's not as effective as people think it is. See, whenever you're just running from loop to loop, or more specifically from pallet to pallet, you're not actively thinking about how to use that pallet or what the best way to utilize those pallets close together are. If you come across a survivor who is just dropping filler pallet after filler pallet after filler pallet, just walk around the fucking things. They're filler pallets. If you don't know, there are 4 types of pallets in Dead by Daylight: filler, unsafe, safe, and god pallets. Filler pallets are pallets that are legitimately not a problem. They can't be a problem. They get dropped and then you walk immediately around them, and the distance between the end of the loop and the filler pallet is so minimal that it literally does not matter. A couple examples of these are those small pallets on RPD where it's got like a wall that's like this high to everybody, and the wall is like not really that long. That's a filler pallet. That's a pallet that literally cannot be used to survive. You will go down. Or at the merry-go-round and swing set on Haddonfuck, that little pallet, I had a clip of it where I lost to a clown. That's a filler pallet. An unsafe pallet is a pallet that may not have as much of risk factor as a filler pallet, but it still has some. Most unsafe pallets are pallets that exist within what I like to call trash loops. which are these big piles of trash, and it generally has a short side and then it has a little bit of a longer side to it, right? And that's an unsafe pallet. And then there are safe pallets. Safe pallets are usually at loops that they don't have to be broken. You can outplay them by bloodlusting really well, but they're still not things that you should take for granted, right? So as the killer, you want to break unsafe pallets. These are usually accompanied by loops that have like a little L. There used to be a lot on the Shattered Shit before they reworked it, but it basically has like a very long side with like an L shape, and then it's got like it's got like a shorter side, but the shorter side is still long enough to like matter. And there's a way to run around those, and it's really annoying. And then God pallets are pallets like shack pallets, pallets that can literally be ran an infinite amount of times, and the killer can't do anything until the killer breaks the fucking pallet. And there's not very many God pallets in the game. At the top of the stairs on RPD, basement or on mid bitch, there's a God pallet going normally right outside of basement. Thank you to all those that said bless you. On mid bitch, right outside of basement, there's normally a God pallet. Shack is a God pallet. So those are examples of all the different kinds of pallets. And just because you know where those pallets are, it doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to use those pallets. A great example of safe pallets, for example, are pallets that are jungle gyms or pallet gyms. These are safe pallets. These are pallets that with the right amount of knowledge, you are able to run them extremely well. And the killer basically has to break them so that they can weaken the loop. But I have seen survivors with windows of opportunity that don't utilize the pallets they're at. So they'll chain together like 2 filler pallets, and then they'll go to a pallet gym or jungle gym, and then they'll just drop that pallet and keep running, instead of staying at the jungle gym and utilizing that pallet. And a lot of times these survivors just drop pallets to drop pallets, and that's not necessarily the best thing in the world, especially depending on the kind of killer you're going against. Now, I'm going to do another video on pallets in the future, because as I play the game and as I experience a little bit more, my thought processes on pallets have changed a little bit, and I'm not going to get into it here. But the point is that there are some pallets that you're just able to play around. And most survivors who use windows of opportunity don't recognize that. You see, they've bought into the bullshit that windows of opportunity just gives you free value by just knowing where all the pallets are. And then when they still go down in 20 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever, they get pissed off because I saw it, man. I was almost at the pallet. How did he catch me? The killer caught you because you're a fucking moron. Sorry. I'm trying to be less aggressive in my videos. The other argument that I heard, which was really weird to me, was people were like, oh, well, if windows of opportunity isn't that strong, which is something that I didn't say. I did admit windows of opportunity was strong. It just scaled with the user of windows of opportunity. But I digress. They said, if windows of opportunity isn't that strong, then why is it one of the most picked perks in the entire game? And there's 2 reasons, and there's 2 things about that. Number one, just because something is the most picked in the entire game, it does not mean that it is the most powerful in the entire game. This is a really bad way to look at game balance. This has always been a shitty way to look at game balance. And developers who make decisions based off of raw statistics over actual gameplay circumstances usually make bad balance decisions. So let's, as a community, not push this narrative that just because something has a high pick rate or that it needs to be nerfed. That's just not how that works. You need to look at how it actually plays. Now, the other part to that is that one of the reasons that it's such a highly picked perk is what I just said a few sentences ago. That is to say that people have convinced the community, and they've convinced themselves, that windows of opportunity is a perk that you can just use and win the game. It's the same thing with MFT, right? I talk about MFT not all the time. Some people think I talk about it all the time, but I talk about MFT a little bit, and I often tell you that it is one of those perks that gets an unnecessary amount of value for very little risk, and that's one of the reasons it's such a huge detriment to the game. And but MFT doesn't play the game for you, right? MFT doesn't necessarily win you every games. I have had MFT on and have still lost games because I'm bad at looping. And it's the same exact thing with Windows of Opportunity. It doesn't immediately increase your looping skills because looping is not necessarily about running from one window to another or one palette to another. It's about knowing how to utilize each and every window and palette that you come to. I'll give you a grand example, a fucking phenomenal example. I was playing on Haddonfuck as Ghostface one day, and that map theoretically should be one of the hardest maps for someone like Ghostface, who's just basically an M1 killer, because Haddonfuck has three pseudo infinites that you can easily get from one to the other because of a lot of the filler and unsafe palettes in between the three infinites. The survivors did not know how to run the infinites whatsoever. And because of that, they got downed and I got a 4K when I really shouldn't have. They were vaulting windows too early. They were vaulting the wrong windows. They were not saving the palette for as long as they possibly could. They just did everything wrong. And because they did everything wrong, I was able to catch and kill them all. And that's just one of the bigger problems with this argument that Windows of Opportunity automatically means that you're going to get more value, because you're not. So moving on from that, because I have been talking for like 11 minutes now on Windows of Opportunity, let's talk about Ultimate Weapon. And arguably the stranger responses to Ultimate... Sorry, let me rephrase that. Arguably, of the two perks people were arguing with me about in the comments, I mean, they were commenting at me, I wasn't really responding, but of the two perks that people were yelling at me about in the comments, the stranger arguments came from Ultimate Weapon. I'm just going to cover the big one first because it's been bugging the shit out of me. But multiple people have stated that Ultimate Weapon is just the Doctor's power, or, this was the crazy one, it's just better than the Doctor's power. Y'all do realize that the Doctor's power isn't just shock, scream, know where they are. Like we do know this, right? The Doctor is a multifaceted killer with an actually kind of complex power, because each of his static blasts has a madness tier attached to it, which Ultimate Weapon does not. Now, that madness tier may not be the greatest thing in the world, but it's better than you think it is. And then on top of that, the Doctor's static blast also has anti-loop. If he activates it, it's the same thing as clicking his M2, which is that little shockwave that he sent, which I think is just called the shock blast or the static shock or something like that. I can never remember the names of these fucking things, but whenever he does this thing, that's the anti-loop that's on that is also the anti-loop that's on his static blast. So his static blast has anti-loop, Ultimate Weapon does not. His he's got a whole nother part to his power in his M2 that we're just all ignoring. But people kept like really honing in on this idea that Ultimate Weapon is just the Doctor's power, but better. And it's not even close to being better. And a lot of people kept saying that it's just another power on top of killers that already have powers. And I really don't understand where this thinking come from, because I've never even heard this argument until people started bringing it up on that video. So I don't know if like somebody else made that argument on a video, or somebody like, or like there was like a Reddit post or something, or everybody at the same time came to the same argument, which I don't necessarily believe. I don't know where people got it from, but it's a really, really bad position to take, because it's not even remotely true. Now, the other part that people were arguing is that the cooldown on it is too short. Every 30 seconds, you open a locker and it makes everybody in your terror radius scream for 30 seconds. They don't scream for 30 seconds, but for 30 seconds, you can make them scream. And then they're blind. But even though it's one of the best info perks in the game, it's still just an info perk. Just because you know where everybody's at doesn't mean you're going to be able to catch them. Doesn't mean you're going to be able to utilize that information. I have had multiple killers that I've gone against who make me scream and go blind every 30 seconds, and I never go down because they're bad. Once again, I think that the thing is, and again, I'm going to talk about this whenever I do my info perk video overall. People need to realize that info perks in this game will never be weaker than C tier because knowledge is something that's very powerful in this game. But that doesn't necessarily mean that info perks, even the most powerful info perks, are things that need to be nerfed completely or necessarily, because at the end of the day, all info does for you is give you information, and what you do with that information, what you do with the scream location thing, is completely different than what you possibly can. A big problem, a very big problem that often happens, and people do this against Doctor too, is their character will scream, they'll get blind, and then they'll fucking panic and they'll like take off running in a direction. And if you didn't watch my Kaiser's Declassified DVD Survivor Guide video, the first episode that I posted, by the way, the second episode is being worked on. I need people to help me film certain things, which I'll get to at some point. But if you watch that video, I talked about not panicking, and that's what happens with a lot of people. They'll scream, they'll go blind, then they'll panic and they'll take off running. So when the killer saunters their big ass over there, they just see scratch marks directly leading to your location. Let's say, for example, you scream because of ultimate weapon, you go blind. Instead of just going and fucking bolting in a direction, try to juke the killer. Run in one direction, then run in the other, and when you get back to the place you started running, start walking. Sometimes you have time to do that, and it can confuse the shit out of the killer. They won't necessarily find you. Sometimes you can hide in a nearby locker. I don't recommend that, but sometimes you can, because not every killer player checks lockers, especially the higher up in MMRs you get. Most killer players don't typically check lockers because it's just not really worth the time to try to check something that most people don't use. But at the end of the day, there are ways to play against the ultimate weapon because it's not an aura reading perk. And if you're really that bothered by it, just do what people have been doing with aura reading perks and bring Calm Spirit. Oh, but I don't want to waste a perk slot to counter another perk. I agree, but I mean, what are you gonna do? Like, as long as we're in this game, and as long as the devs balance certain things the way they do, there's always going to be people bringing perks to counter other perks. By the way, I do believe that Calm Spirit needs a buff, but that's a discussion for another day. But also, like I said, there's ways to naturally counterplay ultimate weapon. Like, yeah, you're not going to know when it's coming, but also if you have the visual heartbeat on, which I greatly recommend for everybody, then you will know innately how close the killer is to you. And if you're outside the killer's terror radius and then all of a sudden you scream and their terror radius is very small, you have an opportunity to reposition and get away. And you can, and I've done it on multiple occasions. Ultimate weapon doesn't need a nerf because at the end of the day, it's just an info perk, the greatest info perk in the game, but it's just an info perk, and that's not necessarily going to improve the power of whatever killer is running it. Now, good killers obviously are going to be able to use ultimate weapon in ways that you really wish they hadn't. My personal favorite is to put it on Wesker with distressing and dead man switch because I'm a fucking asshole. But again, you just really have to think to yourself that maybe, just maybe, whenever you say something plays the game for your opponent or it immediately makes your opponent inherently stronger, I think that you're giving players a bit too much credit. And again, I'm not trying to talk as if I'm on some high ground, like I'm just so much better than everybody else at the video game, but I also recognize that most of the player base does not know how to utilize the tools they are given. And because of that, both of these perks are incredibly balanced. And I know that sounds weird. Like, I know somebody's going to like come up with some random hypothetical like, oh, well, based on what you're saying here, if there was a perk that just always showed the auras, then that would be perfectly okay. And like, no, obviously that's not the case. But neither of these perks continuously show the auras of the enemy or something like that. Windows of Opportunity constantly shows the auras, but we've already gone over that. The point is that info perks, even the best info perks, are really only as strong as the people using them. And in this case, Windows of Opportunity and Ultimate Weapon are the best info perks for Survivor and Killer respectively, but they are only ever going to be as strong as the people utilizing them, and as the people's skill level goes up, so will the perk's usefulness. Now, Ultimate Weapon at the end of the day is a lot more useful than Windows of Opportunity because it also inflicts the blindness effect. But the thing about the blindness effect is that while it is a bit of a bitch and a half, it's also the weakest status effect to inflict on survivors, and it doesn't do as much as people think it does. I mean, I guess it counters fucking Windows of Opportunity. And that's the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much again for watching. And don't forget that we have a new shirt design in the merch shop. If you want to check that out, the Eat Your Face design. I don't have a coupon code for you this month, but check back around Christmas. We'll see what we come up with. And as always, a special thank you to my channel members, The Cannibal Main, Ryan Jester, Alex Ballix, Tabasco Raccoon, Spirit Upgrades, and Nuclear Bomb for their additional support. If you want to find out how to become a channel member today, go ahead and click that join button down below. I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.